All right, let's rewind the clock a bit. Picture this. It's 2015. Apple is, without a doubt, on top of the world, the most successful tech company on the planet. But after the iPod, the iPhone, and the iPad, the big question on everyone's mind was, what's next? This isn't just about cool new gadgets. It's really a story about a company at a huge crossroads, facing a decision that would define the next decade.
And to really get a sense of just how powerful they were, you just have to look at one number, $18 billion. That's how much net income Apple pulled in a single quarter at the end of 2014. That was the most profitable quarter for any company in history, ever. It meant Tim Cook and his team had almost unlimited financial firepower. They could do, well, pretty much anything they wanted.
But, when you have that much cash, the problem isn't what you can do, it's what you should do. It goes right back to what Steve Jobs always said. Apple's real magic came from saying no. So with Jobs' legacy hanging over everything, the pressure was on to pick the right path and prove that Apple could still change the world.
So by 2015, they're basically staring at three huge potential paths forward. Each one was a massive bet on a really uncertain future. The whole world was watching Tim Cook. Was Apple going to get more personal with wearables? Was it going to finally conquer the living room with TV? Or was it going to make the biggest, craziest leap imaginable and get into cars? Let's break down each of those choices.
So, first up, let's talk about the personal bet. Apple was just about to dive into the wearables market with what they were calling their most personal device ever, the Apple Watch. This wasn't just about making a tiny iPhone for your wrist. This was about putting Apple's technology right on your body.
And what's so interesting here is that Apple wasn't just inventing a whole new category from scratch. No, they were stepping onto a stage that was centuries old, with deep, deep cultural roots. We're talking about an industry that went from 16th century wearable clocks to a global business worth over $64 billion in 2014. The wrist was already incredibly valuable real estate. In fact, Apple's design chief, Johnny Ive, he actually spent months just studying the history of timekeeping, arguing that the wrist was the perfect place for this kind of technology.
And listen, Apple's ambition here was, well, it was huge. Tim Cook didn't just want to build the best smartwatch, he wanted to build the best watch. Full stop. The idea was to fuse technology with fashion, to create something that said something about you, just like your clothes or shoes. This was a direct shot at the high-end Swiss watch industry. But they were not walking into an empty field. Not even close. The smartwatch market was already pretty crowded. Samsung was actually the market leader at the time, selling 1.2 million watches in 2014. Then you had Google's Android Wear platform powering watches from LG and Motorola, not to mention the scrappy little startup Pebble. So for Apple to come in at a premium price of $349, that was a really high-stakes gamble. Okay, so that's option one. Option two? Taking over the living room. For years, Apple had sort of dismissed its TV product as just a hobby. But a lot of people, both inside and outside the company, were convinced that the whole television industry was just begging to be disrupted Apple style.
And this whole idea, it had some serious history. It was basically one of Steve Jobs' final big dreams. He famously told his biographer, Walter Isaacson, that he had finally cracked how to make a TV that was simple and just worked. That one quote created these enormous expectations. And years later, in 2014, you still had Apple execs like Eddie Q saying, the TV experience sucks, and Tim Cook calling it stuck back in the 70s.
And this chart really shows you why they thought that. Back in 2014, the average American was still watching a whopping 141 hours of traditional TV every single month. Compare that to just 11 hours of internet video. So people were glued to this medium that, in Apple's eyes, had a terrible, clunky interface. The opportunity was right there. Bring that beautiful Apple design to the biggest screen in the home.
Now, the big wave they were hoping to ride was this trend that everyone was talking about, cord cutting. People were just getting sick of their crazy high cable bills and being forced to pay for hundreds of channels they never watched. Apple's dream was to launch its own streaming service, a smaller, cheaper bundle of maybe the 25 most popular channels, all delivered over the internet, completely cutting out the cable companies.
But, and this is a huge but, to pull this off, they had to go head-to-head with some incredibly powerful gatekeepers. To give you an idea of how tough that would be, just look at this number. $6.61. In 2014, that's what cable companies had to pay per subscriber every month just for ESPN. To build its service, Apple would have to strike deals with giants like Disney and Fox, who were making billions from the system exactly as it was.
All right, and that brings us to the third, and honestly, the most audacious gamble of them all, cars. Rumors were flying everywhere about a top-secret project inside Apple, codenamed Titan, to build an electric car. This wasn't just launching a new product line. This was like jumping into a different universe.
So, you might be asking, why would a phone company even think about building a car? Well, the answer is just one word: scale. The smartphone market that Apple totally dominated was worth around $400 billion. The global auto market, $1.6 trillion. It was one of the only markets on Earth big enough to actually make a dent in Apple's bottom line. And with everything shifting towards electric and self-driving cars, the timing for a disruptor felt perfect.
Here's the problem, though. The business models were like night and day. Apple lived in this world of fat profit margins, around 39%. The car industry? Totally different beast. It's famous for its razor-thin margins. The average was only about 8%, and even the best in the business, like Toyota, were only hitting 13 to 15%. Could a high-margin company like Apple even play in that kind of game?
I mean, just look at how hard it is to crack this market. It's dominated by these giants that have been around forever. To put it into perspective, look at Tesla's slice of the pie in 2014. After more than a decade of incredibly hard work, they had just 0.04% of the market. It just shows you what a monumental, almost impossible task this would be for Apple.
And believe me, the challenges went way beyond just figuring out how to manufacture a car. You had entrenched competitors, unbelievably complex supply chains, a mountain of safety regulations, powerful dealer unions fighting against direct sales, and product cycles that last 3 to 5 years, which is an eternity in Silicon Valley. It was a completely different business with completely different rules.
So there you have it. 3 completely different futures, each with massive potential, but also huge risks. Let's just quickly sum up the strategic choice that Tim Cook and the team at Apple were facing back in 2015.
You've got the watch, a super personal new category, but a really crowded and unproven market. You've got the TV, a huge audience that hates the current experience, but powerful gatekeepers standing in the way. And then the car, the biggest prize of them all, but it came with just staggering financial risks and a business model that was the total opposite of Apple's. Look, choosing one of these meant they had to say no to the others, at least for a while. It was a massive decision. So I'll leave you with this question. If you were in Tim Cook's shoes, with all that history, all that money, and all that pressure, which one of these incredible opportunities would have been the hardest for you to say no to?